And so I had my great nephew with us over the course of this week, and he just turned 11 months. He turned 11 months old while he was with us, which means he's at that stage where he can crawl and he can laugh, but he can't yet bombard you with question after question. He can't yet really talk, and he's just a lot of fun. He's just a lot of fun to be with. And one of the things that I noticed as all of us were spending time with him, is that babies make adults foolish. I mean, they absolutely do. We change the way that we talk. We talk to babies in ways, like I challenge you to talk to your waiter today when you go to the restaurant, the way that you would talk to a baby. I'd like a fajita. Yes, I would. I would love a fajita. How does a fajita say? I mean, we really get into it. And not only that, we'll crawl on the ground when we can barely walk at any stage in our lives. We'll do anything, it seems, to make a baby giggle. Because there is no greater pleasure than an innocent child receiving endless joy at our efforts. That is one of the most pleasurable experiences that exists in the world today, is when an innocent child receives joy by your actions and responds to you in love. One of the greatest challenges with Felix this week is that he's a pretty private young man. He likes his alone time, and he likes his time with his mom. So every one of us were competing to get him just to allow us to hold him. And at the end of the week, we'd spend the week with him, and my brother-in-law, he came over, and at one point he was getting Felix to kind of scoot closer and closer to him, and Felix was turned backwards so he didn't see him. And at one point he reached down to grab him, and Felix looks up, and he gets this grimace on his face, and he just goes, whoo, like that. And he had to set him down, and he crawled back to his mom, and we're like, you have failed, my friend. Like, you did not achieve greatness. All that to say, people do what they wouldn't normally do to express love. When it comes to expressing love, some of the greatest expressions of love are when people do what they would not normally do. Because that is what we would call special behavior. I think about the story of David in 2 Samuel chapter 6. In 2 Samuel chapter 6, verses 12 through 17, you see that David is returning the ark the Ark of the Covenant, back to Israel, returning him back to Jerusalem. This man named Obed has had the ark at his house, and as he's had the ark at his house, Obed and his family have experienced this magnificent blessing. And so David organizes his troop to go back and return the ark back to the people. And as he does, it says that every 6 steps that they took with the ark, David would pause the march and he would sacrifice an animal to the Lord. You think it's bad when your children have to have a bathroom break every 5 to 10 miles. Imagine every 6 steps on the journey back home, you had to stop, procure a cow, and slaughter the cow, and then offer it to the Lord. How long would it take you to get home? I guarantee you that there were some people in the party going, could we just get it over with? How much further? How much longer, David? But David would turn back to them and say, it doesn't matter how long it takes for us to get home. What matters is that God is finally with us. And as you continue to read in 2 Samuel chapter 6, what you see from David is not only the 6-step sacrifice action. You see David eventually, he just takes off the majority of his clothing down to his linen ephod, basically his long underwear. And he begins to dance with ferocity. He dances unashamed. He dances with all of his might before the ark as it's coming in to Jerusalem. And then you see his wife, Michal, in verse 17. It says that she sees him from the tower and she despises him because of how undignified he's become. And in many ways, it ends and ruins their marriage. Because David has chosen to act before the Lord in a way no sane person would ever do. In a way that is unbecoming of a king in his wife's eyes. And his response to her, in some ways you're like, oh man, that's so cool. And then in other ways you read it and you're like, ooh, I don't know if I would have said that. He basically says, woman, I'll become even more undignified than this before the Lord. You think dancing in my ephod's bad? You just wait. You just wait to see how much I love the Lord. I so appreciated the scripture that you chose to share with us, Ralph, and the way that it was worded, because God tells us that, yes, we are to give of the things that he's given us, but he's not really concerned with how much we give. He's concerned with why we give what we give in the first place. He doesn't want you to give back to him of necessity, going, man, I have to give another dollar, or begrudgingly, man, I can't believe that I'm going to give him this much and then I have to give up this much. He wants us to give in anticipation of the goodness of who he is. In other words, going, man, it is a pleasure and an honor to be able to give back some of what he's given me, knowing that he's going to continue to give me all that I need every time I need it. And that's what it means to be a cheerful giver. Because what we need to realize as we enter into our relationship with God is that God is the God who gives first, and God is the God who gives most. God gives first and he gives most. To find out that that's true, all you have to do is open your Bibles to the book of Genesis and look at the conditions that he placed Adam and Eve in. It says that there was a land, and the land itself was called Eden. And in the land of Eden, God had placed a garden, and that garden is called Eden, meaning paradise. In the land of Eden, God created a paradise. And in the middle of paradise, God placed Adam and created Eve. You see, God gave them first. And he gave them most because there was nothing there that left them wanting. Every tree that was in that garden was desirable. The fruit that those trees produced were delicious and they were desirable. The work that God had called them to do always produced. You guys know what it is to do work and then wind up disappointed, feeling that the work that you've done is meaningless, like you've wasted your time. You guys know what it is to work a full week on a project and then have that project, the work that's done, be torn up and thrown away because somebody has decided that that project is no longer valuable and it's time to do something new. That's not the kind of work that Adam and Eve had in the garden. When they threw a seed on the ground, that seed produced a tree. And that tree wasn't gnarly, that tree was beautiful. And not only was that tree beautiful, that tree was fruitful. And that fruit continued to bless them day after day for who knows how long they were in the garden, because we do not know how long they were in it. And then we read, the adversary begins to plant in their mind that there's something missing that is not actually missing. And the thing that he tells them that is missing is their ability to choose themselves over God. And so as we're talking about what it means to love God today, we're going to introduce and discuss some elements of loving God that I think people get misconstrued. But what we need to realize is that not only does God love first, he loves most. And when he calls us to love him, the love that he calls us to is a love that is the most. You see, you can love many things, but the thing that you love most will determine the way you respond to your life. You can love your wife, or you can love your boyfriend, or you can love your girlfriend, or you can love your children. But whichever one of those you love the most will determine the behavior that exists from your life. Because also you can love yourself. And so people can love God and then not obey him and it's not because they don't love God, it's because they don't love God most. And so as we turn to John chapter 14, and we read Jesus' words, he says this. He says in verse 15, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. It's not an ultimatum that Jesus is offering to his followers. He's not saying that if you love me, you'll buy me a Mercedes. He's not saying, hey, prove your love to me by your obedience. He's saying the result of your love for me will ultimately produce the behavior that I've called you to live by. And where we get that twisted is in America, we're so used to the ultimatum kind of love request. If you love me, you'll never speak to that person again. If you love me, you'll neglect your children and choose me. If you love me, you will do these things that prove your love for me. God does not call us to prove our love for him. He calls us to live in the evidence of our love for him. And really for us, this is one of these words may be a big word for you. God calls us into obedience and not acquiescence. The call of God and love for God is a call to live for him in a way that results in our behavior imitating him. And some of us get it twisted and we think that what God wants is acquiescence, and that means setting aside and just doing. That just doing actually is resulting in love. And God is saying, no, just loving is resulting in doing. And so you can look at an individual and look at the things that they do, and you can begin to say that person really loves God. While God says, no, you look at the outward appearance, I look at the heart. That person doesn't love me. They just look like they love me. You guys probably know some people who are in marriages like that. When they're out and about, they look like they're totally in love, but what you don't know is that when they get home, they go to their separate places and they really don't ever talk. They don't share common interests. They're staying together maybe for the appearance of good, but they're not actually living out the love that they're professing with their speech or their actions in public. And see, what God has called us to is a convergence of sacrifice and trust. The obedience that God calls us to is a sacrifice that is the result of absolute trust. You see, the reason that we want Felix to come to us is we want him to see us in our family as someone worth coming to. We want him to not be afraid of us at 11 months old, so we play pee-pie with him and pop up around the corner, and we crawl on the ground, and we pretend like a water bottle is the most interesting thing in the world and roll it back and forth to him, and we make sure doors are closed, and we make sure the temperature is set just right, and we make sure that when he cries, it's not because of his diaper or because he's really hungry. It's just because babies cry sometimes, and we're eager to figure out what it is that he needs, wants, and loves so that we can love him according to his needs and wants. So God is not saying, in order to love me, keep my commandments. He's saying, because you love me, keep my commandments. And not just because you love me, keep my commandments. Because you know me, trust that keeping my commandments will lead you to the best possible life that you could have. Don't be unfaithful to your husband. Don't be unfaithful to your wife. Not because I said so, but because I am so. Because I am so good to you. Because I am so wise. Because I am so awesome. Because I am so important to you. You choose to be faithful to your wife or to your husband, even when he or she is not faithful to you, trusting that if you sacrifice in this relationship, it will result in the greatest good that could happen. And that may mean that it impacts your children in such a way that when they look back on the relationship, they come back to you because you were honorable. And it may mean that in your position at work, other people who are struggling come to you because you've been so faithful and you have the opportunity to share your faith in God with them. Or it may mean that your husband or wife comes back to you. I don't know what it means. I just know that because God offered it up to you as behavior, it means that your best life is going to come from it. Be honest in your business. Don't cheat other people. Don't overprice your goods seeking to make a great profit. Don't treat people who work underneath you with little respect, but seek their interest over your own interest, not because it's just the right thing to do, but because you believe the character of God when he says this will lead you to the most excellent life. Don't gossip and badmouth the people in your school. Don't let your relationship with other people be so dependent on negativity and the stories and secrets that you share. But live your life with integrity and only speak the things that build other people up instead of being interested in the things that tear them down. Not because God just said so, but because you believe the goodness of God and the propriety, the properness of his call to you will lead you to a life that is better than any life that you could choose for yourself by getting the cheap laugh. The unity that comes from negativity. But pursue the bond of peace. You see, obedience is the convergence of sacrifice and trust. That's why in John, we read that in John 3:16, that God so loved the world that he gave his only son. God loved us and believed that life with us was desirable, so he gave up his son Jesus. And not only did God do that, Jesus himself was on board with that, because if you turn to 1 John chapter 3:16, the two John 3:16s, you read this. This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his love for us. God laid down the life of his son, and the son laid down his own life in obedience to God, believing that the byproduct of laying down his life would result in more life. And so that's the question that I have to ask you today. Do you believe that the laying down of your life in obedience to God's will result in more life? If you don't believe that, then you'll pursue success according to your own values, and you'll pursue justice according to your own sense of justice. And you'll pursue humor and entertainment according to your own sense of entertainment. And let me tell you what the result of that will be every single time. It will be death. You want to kill your friendships? Worship yourself. You want to kill your career? Worship yourself. You want to kill your marriage? Worship yourself. Worshiping yourself will always lead to death. And here's the bad news. It won't only lead to death here. it will lead to eternal death. Because God has given you not only the freedom to choose, but the power to choose who you will be with for eternity. Because God's not a brainwasher, and he's not a kidnapper. God is a lover. And don't get that misconstrued. I'm not talking about romantic, sexual love. I'm talking about eternal, selfless love. God is a lover. And he loves you. And he loves you. And he loves you. And he loves you so much that he himself became undignified. You see, when Philippians chapter 2 tells us that Jesus, being in very nature God, humbled himself and became a man, we hear that and we're used to it. Many of us aren't really moved by it so much. We think, yeah, 6-step sacrifice, 6-step sacrifice. How long before we get to the end? Can we just sing the invitation song already? What we don't realize that Roman culture did is that in that culture, this statement is one of the most disgusting, demeaning statements a person could make about God. That God would put on nasty flesh. That God would have to use the bathroom of all things. That God himself would put himself in a position where he needed a bath. That God himself would limit himself to hunger and to despair and pain and hardship. What kind of foolishness is this? It's as if God got down on his knees and started talking baby talk. So that you would have the ability to understand and love him back. And so when we talk about obedience to God, we're not just talking about this system of behaviors. We're talking about what the Gentiles and Jews who came to believe in Jesus would call the way. They would use language like this: I belong to the way. The way has possession of me. You see, in John 14, Jesus doesn't only say, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. He also says, and I will ask the Father, and he'll give you another helper to be with you forever, even the Spirit of truth, whom the world can't receive, because it doesn't know him or see him, but you know him because he dwells with you and will be in you. I will not leave you as orphans. And so I ask you today, do you love God or do you just like him? Because if you just like God, then perhaps you come to church on Sundays and you sing a few songs and you participate in your communion meal and you put a little money in the plate and you smile and nod and tell everybody you're fine as you walk out the door. But if you love God, then you start acting weird. Then you change your speech and you don't use words that demean other people, and you don't joke about things that devalue the human body that God created or the opposite sex. And you don't cheat people so that you can make a profit. And worshiping God on Sundays not only becomes something that you have to do, but it moves beyond that into something that you get to do. And so you don't stand here looking solemn while the songs are being sung. You sing them, even if you don't sing them well, directly from the pleasure that you receive from knowing that you have a relationship with God. The man who would strip down to his pajamas and dance before the Lord becomes the man and the woman that you are. And it's not just about obedience, it's about loving God the way he has loved you. And so you begin to sacrifice your behaviors, which means you may give up your times for time with other people. You see, that's what obedience, the obedience God calls us to, looks like. That's what it looks like to love God. So God's desire is that we respond to his love with love of our own. So I ask you this. What is trusting God leading you to do? Maybe you're just now coming to the point in your life where you're looking at the story of Jesus and you're beginning to believe it. And it's leading you to get into his word and know him more. Maybe you've been looking at his word for a little while now and having some conversations with people who do follow the Lord, and you're trying to decide, is this believable enough for me to bet my life on it? And you're starting to feel the pull of the Holy Spirit drawing you to confess your faith and enter into the waters of baptism and die with Jesus, to life with Jesus. To give up the things that you've been chasing and start walking with the Lord. Or maybe you've been walking with the Lord for a long time, but actually you haven't been walking with the Lord. You've been walking way far back from the Lord, and he's calling you to come. And there's just some things that you haven't let go of yet. You haven't been able to make peace or forgive others. You haven't been able to mean the songs that you've been singing on Sunday mornings. You haven't been able to put others before you. You haven't been able to take seriously the commands that he's given you, because in essence, you've really been loving you and liking God. But now you realize that it's time for you to put your money where your mouth is and love God. And not only love God, but love God most. Because I'll tell you this, and this is the truth. If you choose to love God most, it will make the most of your life. If you choose to love God most, it will make the most of your life. What is trusting God leading you to do today? Make that known while together we stand and we sing.